like all of the rest.
Thanks for coming on, Tim.
Happy to be here.
It's great to have you on. Now the shoe's sort of on the other foot.
Yeah, you know what? I like it a lot. Occasionally, I get interviewed, and it's a lot easier to say I really don't know or I don't have any comment than it is to ask it the other way around.
Well, I mean, I'm sure I've never known you to say no comment. You certainly seem to have an opinion, even if you don't show it all the time.
But the older you get, though, it's easier for me to say I have absolutely no idea. Because a lot of this stuff, when you're young, you got all the answers. I mean, when I was started, I had all the answers. But when you're older, I say, well, you know, I tell my wife, I don't really know that.
Once you've seen it all, you know, you always know that there's something that could come around the corner that you can't anticipate. I mean, that's, you know, given what we've gone through the last 5 or 6 years or 10 years, it's
I agree.
You're less. And a good lawyer once told me, Mark Fox from Fraser Trebelcock once said, you know, you're never wrong if you don't predict. And what he didn't understand is we don't all have perfect memory. So even when we're recounting what we've just done, we don't always recount.
I like to say the older I get, the more I don't know, the more I do know. When you're young, I mean, I remember when I was young, I had all the answers. At least I thought I did.
So my top flight research crew says you've been in the sports broadcasting 53 years.
55.
55 years.
That the website at WILX needs to get updated more often than it is.
Longest standing sports journalist in the state of Michigan?
Doing what I do, yeah. I wonder if there's anybody else more nationwide, just because I read about all these guys nationwide that say, well, they're getting out after 42 years or 43 years or 48 years. And I say, you know, I mean, all that means is I'm just getting that much older.
And, you know, you do a good enough job that you're a Hall of Famer, right?
Well, look, as you know, anything, but you're a youngster compared to me. The older you get, the first thing is how's your health? And a lot of people, and I'm 75, okay, so I'll be 76 in March. I've seen too many people that were enjoying doing what they did and they retired and got out of it, including my dad, and his health went straight downhill. But like my oldest son tells me, if they don't like what they do, they retire. If they do like what they do, then they don't want to retire. And I agree with that to the extent that I've enjoyed what I'm doing. The other thing is the people you work for, do they still want you around? So I guess, like Perlis used to say, I guess I fooled them enough that they still say, fine, you know, come on around.
In today's day and age, with everything becoming so complex, that's often the reason why people get out. We see what appears to have happened with Nick Saban, right? It sounded like he was so frustrated with NIL that he just wanted to do something.
Well, 15 years ago when high-def television came around, it meant all the local stations in America at some time had to go high-def, which meant that the technology for the employees changed. I went home when I took the first training session, and I said to her, this may be the end, because I don't know how I'm ever going to get this, because I'm not necessarily digitally inclined like kids are today.
Right.
And what I ended up doing was I took the 3 or 4 best we had, young people that were in our company, paid them, came in on weekends, and got the bare minimum that I had to do to get on the air like I do every day now in high def, which was different from analog television at the time. So I remember that well. I was worried.
But things have even changed in the last 4 or 5 years with what's going on, and yet you seem to handle it all in stride. I mean, the radio business is much different than it was when you started, and TV is much different, and staffing, and it's very much more competitive.
Well, when I started in TV, it was a single owner. And there was no cable, because I was on the TV the first time in the fall of 1970. I was doing the weather.
What was really, cable didn't come till almost a decade later.
79 or so.
79.
And Lansing Township finally got cable in here. That changed everything.
79 though, but even then, not a lot of people had it. I remember we had it installed, and we weren't going to install it unless they could do underground, and you had a box on your TV that actually had a cable.
Well, you were paying for something you never used to have to pay for.
Right.
And now it's going the other way. Now young people, I mean, my 3 have all these channels. They don't pay for it. They figure out how to stream it and everything else. I don't even know hardly what the word streaming means to begin with. I mean, do I like the cable? The only reason we have cable is because I'm too old to change this thing around, and I can work the remote. But if it got tougher than that, I watch how they do what they do to get something up when we visit them. One's in Florida, one's in New York, and one's in Cleveland. And when I watch how they do what they do, I can't do. And like I say to her, I don't like the cable bill of $320, but I'm too old. It's too much hassle to change
It's
it.
interesting because, you know, it used to be to watch TV, the most expensive thing was the TV.
Yeah.
And now it's not even close to the commitment you make between streaming and Hulu or whatever your service is. And you can buy a 75-inch TV from Costco for $600, and, you know, that is nothing compared to the $300 or $400 a month that you're going to spend.
Well, I mean, I tell people the most impact I ever had in 55 years was the front end, not now, because on the front end there were like 2 channels. When I said something at 21 years old on the 6 o'clock sports and somebody didn't like it, I heard about it because that's the only thing you could watch. Now when you're on, you're up against how many different channels that somebody might not necessarily want to watch local television news. I mean, I'm almost shocked 55 years later that local television news is still an entity today to some degree.
It seems to be doing well. I mean, if you're going to advertise here in town, you know, the news is, right?
It's
one of the bigger games.
It is. The investment is still made by most local affiliates. What has changed, or it used to be 6 and 11 o'clock. Now they're all day long.
Right.
You go to New York City, you can watch 12 different news stations. I don't know how they all make it. Local.
Yeah, and I'm surprised really that the locals still do the weather.
Well,
you know, and
we have this discussion all the time. I can get my telephone out and do the whole thing. And yes, that discussion comes up constantly. How many weather people do we need? Because these TV stations and broadcast stations, when I started, they were all individually owned. My goal was to get with Joel Ferguson and buy a radio station, and he and I were going to run it. But then things changed as he found out when he bought a television station that the state of the world was such that if you're going to get into this, you have to be a conglomerate.
Right.
The company that owns WILX TV has 108 stations. I'm one of like 10,000 employees. Used to be I was one of 60.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
It's a big difference.
You graduated from East Lansing High School.
Yes.
You grew up here in East Lansing.
I was born in Bloomington, Indiana. My dad was on the staff in the business school in Indiana. He went to MIT. So I would have been 4 or 5 years old, and then Michigan State offered him the head of the Marketing and Transportation Administration Department, and the Epley Center's still there over there. Looks pretty much the same. So we moved here when I was the second semester of kindergarten in 55.
And did you move into Glencairn?
We started over right behind the old Lucon Theater, which became the Campus Theater, 405 Albert Street. And that duplex is still there, and it's still being rented out. Because when I have other family members come in, I say, well, we lived there, we lived there, we lived there, and that. And then after he moved, you know, I mean, it's a young family. There was me and my brother. My sister didn't come along until 56. And eventually they bought a house, and that was in Glencairn.
And you've lived, you went to East Lansing, and you went to Michigan State?
Went to Michigan State. I was class of 67, Michigan State 71. I got done in 4 years and 5 weeks.
Yeah, and they couldn't understand why you needed the extra 5 weeks.
I took home economics to get 3
credits.
Get 3 credits in at the end, because I frankly had somewhat been disingenuous to the boss, because he said if you're going to do the sport, you have to have graduated. So I thought, what's the worst thing I'm going to do? Because I was doing the part-time weather and radio news with George Blaha at the time. So he didn't really check that out. So very quietly, I got those 3 credits done 2-3 days a week, and got done in July, and then moved in to a dormitory with Jay Breslin, Jack's son. Jay Breslin was my age. He went to Michigan State on a football scholarship. And in those days, other than getting in January before spring practice, he wanted to get in to get a couple of credits out of the way so that when he started freshman football in the fall, he wouldn't have to take a full 15 credits.
And in between graduating from Michigan State, when did you start at Channel 6?
Well, I had been working at what is now WFMK Radio. I was writing for the East Lansing Town Courier as a high school kid. And in those days, there was one owner that had one of the radio stations. He wanted to do a little 5-minute radio thing, and I never thought about that. So long story short, I got a little tiny tape recorder and went out there did a couple little interviews because I was working in sports information at Michigan State. And so you get to meet the media people. There aren't many of them then as there are today. And the guy at Channel 6, I got to know him. I was smart enough to try to introduce myself around because I thought this might be kind of fun. And one day he said to me, you know, we have a radio news opening at WJIM Radio. And they know who you are and your dad and all that. You ought to go apply for that. So I did, got it. I'm going to school. And I'm working up to 39 hours. Blaha was there. We're in the same thing. We're doing radio, and we have real tape. George is interviewing the mayor. And that's what we did. And then as I was getting near the end, in the fall of 70, they wanted to take the television weather guy who was doing a morning radio shift. They wanted to get him off the 11 o'clock TV weather because his day was too long. They wanted to do the morning radio and the 6 o'clock weather and find a late night weather guy. So I wandered over and I said, you know, I'm already here at night doing radio news. I can do that and I'll do it for free. Free was the key word. That was really key. So the guy says to me, do you know anything about weather? I go, what's to know? So that night, so he said, all right, tomorrow we're going to give you an audition. So I went over to the local grocery store and bought one of those little 10-cent Dell books. You too can know the weather. Read the thing. And one thing that...
Most you've ever prepared.
Pretty much. The one thing the good Lord gave me was a chance to ad-lib a little bit.
Right.
So now we didn't, as I tell our weather guys today, who it looks like they're in the airport with that technology, the equipment they have, you know, we just had the metallic thing, and I just spun the board and did that. And if you say on the air and weather that there's a Mexican high coming in, and it's going to be here in 3 days, who's going to argue with you?
Right.
So I used to, and so then he said, well, we'll try it. Okay, so I did that for 4 or 5 months. Until the sports thing came, and I just beat on him. I said, this is really what I want to do. So to influence him that I knew sports, when I would say, well, the weather in Chicago tomorrow is going to be 55 degrees and partly cloudy, perfect for the Cubs game tomorrow when they play St. Louis. That's absolutely what I did on the air. And I knew that the sports guy, who still is in contact with me today, he's retired, lives in Minnesota, I knew he'd get into a fight. In the moment that he was out, I went over there. And again, I tell students today, the key thing I said was, this won't cost you much. Pay whatever you want to pay.
Right.
And you can get rid of me at any time you want to. Because if you go in there with big demands and you have no credibility, now you're a risk. You're no risk if it doesn't cost you.
And there's no pressure. When there's no pressure, you're not putting any pressure on yourself.
I did 5 months of sports TV, and at Christmas time in 1971, he called me in and said, you've done a great job. I'm going to give you $7,000 a year, the biggest contract, biggest working agreement. We didn't have contracts. It was a working agreement, meaning if he didn't like me, I'm gone. And if I wanted to stay, it didn't make any difference. I'm still gone.
Right.
That's how it worked.
That's great. And then at some point you moved to Channel 10, but you're sort of off and running.
I had been 11 years from 1969 to 80. And in those days, Channel 10 wasn't then what it is. It was in Jackson, and it had split time on the air with Michigan State Television. They got the first half of the day, and WILX-TV got the second half of the day. And I knew who the general manager had just gone over there, and after 11 years, he called me up and he said, you know, well, I'd like to hire you to come over here and do this. Well, at the time, I felt kind of like a baseball player under the reserve clause because I couldn't do anything on the side because the guy I worked for, he called the shots. And I had borrowed $10,000 from him to buy a home, the first house. I should have gone to my dad, but I went to him, and he agreed to do it. There were some conditions on it if I left, paying it back. But the more I went, so they were offering me twice the money and freedom. In other words, I said, what if I want to do play-by-play of television basketball? Can I do that? Well, I had cards to play because I didn't take the job yet. Oh, yeah, you can do that. Well, what if I have to be gone a day or two in advance? Oh, yeah, we can handle that. Well, I need a staff. Well, we got 2 other guys for you. So, I mean, once I piled it up, I mean, look, do I remember going, and then it got in the newspaper. It was on the front page of the paper.
That was a big story back then.
Back then it was, because there wasn't as much local television. So the day I decided I was going to do it, and I went in and told, that was tough. I was nervous. But what bailed me out, he was mad. But there was no such thing as a clause that, a non-compete. There wasn't anything like that then. And he asked me why. So when we were done discussing this and he wasn't happy, I said to him, I understand I owe you some favors. I understand you gave me a shot. But they called me. I didn't call them. What would you do if you were me in this situation? And frankly, he didn't have an answer for that. 3 years later, he tried to hire me back, and I almost did it, but I thought if he was tough to work for the first time, coming back at twice the money is going to be that much tougher. So I didn't do it, and I stayed. Now, since then, this WILX has had a number of different owners. So has WJIM to WLNS. Surviving new ownership in any business, as you know, is huge.
Well, you've done that for certain.
I was fortunate,
Yeah.
because this is probably the 4th or 5th ownership in television. And the bigger the company, they don't necessarily know who you are.
Right. So there's a positive and negative.
But I tell even students and people today, when you're young and you get employed, a couple things. First thing is, how much do you want to do this job? Because you haven't paid your dues yet. You're replaceable. I never thought, and don't to this day, ever go to work during the day and think I'm not replaceable. They replace me in a heartbeat, and a lot cheaper, okay? So I always felt, if you want to keep doing what you're doing, I tell this to my own 3 boys, if you want to keep doing this, you got to understand who you got to keep happy. And you may not like to do it, and you may disagree with what the strategy is. And to some degree, you can discuss that.
Right.
But you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them, unless you don't care what the consequences are. I always cared what the consequences are.
My kids often are interested in starting their own business, because that's something that I've basically done for the last 30 years. And I tell them all the time, hey, there's nothing wrong with getting a paycheck every 2 weeks and getting your 401k fully funded and getting your health insurance paid and not having to manage employees. But there always is that time when they can come to you well beyond your possibility and let you go, and you've got to always be ready for that, And you've obviously done well, but you've also made a big professional commitment and personal commitment to living in Lansing as your whole life.
We almost went to Dayton, Ohio. The one that was the hard call was the NBC WMAQ in Chicago. It was the NBC owned and owned. And the agent on the thing was Todd Musburger, Brent Musburger's brother. I got to meet him. He represented his brother. He was in Chicago. And I don't know, I don't remember all the details. He got to know me, and he said, there's a radio and a weekend TV at the NBC O&O. You'll get moved up, blah, blah, blah. But we had just gotten married, and she was pregnant, and she had a job here teaching locally, which she enjoyed. She was teacher of the year in 3 different school districts, and she enjoyed that. And I thought about it. And at that time, this would have been about 38 years ago or so, I thought to myself, if this opportunity is here now, it might be here down the road. But then when I stayed, I didn't have all the other things that I got to do, which I wouldn't have got in Chicago. I did 10 years of play-by-play on television of Big Ten football and basketball, at which for those 10 years I enjoyed. Then the decision had to be made. You can't do both daily radio and go on the road and do these games. And the radio worked out 32 years ago beyond what I ever thought it was going to work out to where it is today, knock on wood. So after 10 years, all those contracts changed, and the Big Ten Network was formed in that. And I thought, I've done this for 10 years. And traveling in those days isn't like Blaha does it today, where he gets on the team plane, or you fly first class Detroit, Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles.
Right.
Going nonstop Lansing to Iowa City isn't easy to do.
No.
So after 10 years of that, then I let that go. But the Chicago one, we debated, and to be honest with you, Andrew, I've never looked back. because I said to her, our lifestyle living here, I got one in New York. Every time I go to New York, I say to them, do you know how much money I would have to make in this market to have a lifestyle somewhat similar to what it is in Lansing, Michigan?
Impossible.
It's impossible.
But there is you sacrifice some things. And there's some nice things about being in New York, but you can always visit, right?
Yeah, I never thought I need to go from market 80 to 60 to 40 to 20. I never thought that way. Some do. I never did. I was always with the quality of lifestyle and do we like it here? And because I was able to do some other things. And because the people I worked for and with, I enjoyed every day. And I thought to myself, why I heard somewhere, who was it said, Simon, the best moves you make are the moves you don't make. I mean, how would that have worked out? I'll never know, but I have never regretted this move long term.
That's an interesting. You never look back and say, God, if I would have gone here.
And partly it's because, look, I've been very grateful because this has worked out. I'm 75 and I'm still working because I want to.
Right, that's perfect. And you mentioned radio, and I assume you're talking about Staudt on Sports.
Right.
32 years ago. So what would have that been? 88, 89?
So in February of 1993, a woman called. I was in a hotel room in Columbus, Ohio. That night I'm doing the Michigan State-Ohio State televised basketball game. And she called me in my hotel room, and she said, we'd like to add a radio show, blah, blah, blah. Would you be interested? So I go back and I meet with her. Well, we had young kids then, and she wanted to do it for a half an hour at noon each weekday for a half an hour. And we'll give you $150 a week if you do it. So I thought about it and looked at it. So I said, well, I'm kind of she teaches, so I'm home here with these. Well, we'll put a studio in your house. So I thought, I'll believe that one. And they came out with some contraption and tried it. And it worked. So I said, all right, I'll give it a shot. But I had to go back on the road for another game the first week of the radio, and she debated delaying it till after basketball. And I said to myself, some things change in the industry. I better strike right now because they want me on here. So I managed to work it out. A month later, it went to an hour. A year later, it went to 90 minutes. 5 years later, it went to 2 hours. And in the first year or two of that, I'd be on the air, and it was in the master bedroom. And with the kids there, they would come in and use the bathroom, and there were times you could hear the toilet flush over the air. I could lie and say this was all a big-time professional operation, but that's exactly. But when I tell those stories at speeches, they get the best response. But it was true. Eventually, then, it got when they were old enough to get into school, and we moved into a studio.
Yeah, I sort of remember as a young lawyer listening to you on the radio, whether I was driving around or whatever.
I never thought it would take off the way it did. But I didn't even get a key to the building till 27 years later. I never asked for one. I just hit the buzzer when I go, and if they let me in, they let me in.
They haven't given me a key to this building.
Well, so we were in a meeting one time 5 years ago, and the guy says, well, do blah, blah. I said, well, I don't have a key. He said, what do you mean you don't? I said, so he says, you don't have a fob to the building? I said, never really asked for one. In all of these, I have no contracts anywhere. If they change the fob, then I guess that tells me what I need to know. Right. There are no agreement. And even when there's new ownership, they'll say, well, now what is I said, I don't have anything to show you. I just come in here and they tell me to do it every day.
But you have good people over at Channel 10 that you work with on a daily basis. But I've noticed even over the years, they would call and want to do an interview about something, and they used to send a crew out, and now it's a single person. Some of them aren't even reporters. They're just camera people.
It's like a lot of things, in broadcasting, we're not overstaffed at either radio or television. But again, part of it is because if the conglomerate owes you, it used to be, man, we'd look at those TV ratings. I'm telling you, the rating. Now it's the bottom line.
Right.
How much money did you make in the first quarter? They don't care how you got it. So for the people that I work with, it used to be, it was February, May, November, and July. Those four were the big rating months, especially February, May, and November. You couldn't go on vacation and blah, blah, blah. Now they still take those numbers, but the numbers that count to the companies, how much money did we make?
Advertising dollars, really, right? And overhead.
I mean, is there a correlation between the two relative to who watches and what revenue comes in? To some degree, but not, because I think broadcast ratings are extremely difficult to get accurate. When I hear that 57.5 million watched the NFL game last Sunday, I say, how did you arrive at that? Because if you counted me, I have a remote control, and I'll hit that thing 8 times watching something. So what did I really watch?
Right.
And did I watch the commercials?
Do they include the people at the bar who have 15 TVs in front of them?
I mean, does that include people in the waiting area of the airport who are waiting to get on a flight? 20 people are watching. I mean,
it's a science, but that's what they sell, right?
But to your point, consolidation of it used to be we'd have 3 people on the floor running cameras. Nobody; those are all robotic. We used to have 6 people in the production booth doing production direction. There's 2 now, because the rest of it's all digital. And I think, and if you look at the networks now, I think the trend in network news is they want to get away from paying anchors $15 million a year. So if they can figure out a way to get this to you at a much lower cost, that is the direction of the industry. No question about it.
Yeah, I mean, there was something about, Walter Cronkite or Bernie Shaw brought us the invasion of Iraq. I think he was in the hotel room, or Walter Cronkite, and we don't have that emotional attachment anymore.
No. Well, I mean, even in Cronkite's days, you had John Chancellor, you had David Brinkley, you knew, and you had CBS has, I don't know how many reporters, but they didn't call them that. They called them correspondents.
Right.
Eric Severide was a CBS correspondent.
Dan Rather
was a correspondent. Now, I mean, they're general reporters. But to your point, the world has dramatically changed. I mean, in the Cronkite's days, he never went up against cable. I remember Howard Cosell used to say, well, we still have the top ratings on Monday Night Football, and it's never changed. Cosell never went up against cable television.
Right. Well, Monday Night Football is still a big deal, but it
is. But when he did
it,
you had NBC and CBS against Monday Night Football. Now, and you have NFL football 4 or 5 nights a week to begin with. So the Monday night game's just another. And now they'll do 2 games on some Monday nights. Right. So, I mean, when you dilute this stuff, obviously the numbers are going to change all the way around. That's why I say, when I started out on TV and I'd say something stupid on the air, man, I heard about it. And the management heard about it because the people watched it. Now now I'm smart enough to know what will and will not resonate. But when I was 23, I had all the answers.
You're never too old to say something stupid, though.
No, but if you learn from it, remember, radio is 3 hours a day, that's 15 hours a week. People say, what are you most proud of? I said 32 years and not been suspended. Because you look at those who do get suspended or fired or terminated because of some incredible thing that they said, and it's an enormous issue for them.
Well, hopefully we don't say anything here that you have to worry about. Yeah. So one thing that hasn't changed is the importance of MSU football in this community. And you've seen, I assume you knew every single head coach dating back to.
Well, I was Big E Munn's paper boy when he became athletic director.
Right. So, and we've had some good ones. Right.
I lived across in those. In those days, the Doherty, where Duffy lived, is not where coaches live today. In fact, when I drive through the old neighborhood, and I say that's where Duffy Doherty lived for most of his career, he bought a home in what was then the first White Hills. Right. And we had bought one on Old Mill Road just behind where he was. But even by those standards, as he was getting near the end of his career, it was an upgrade for him. But by today, it just was so incredibly different then. I claim Big E Munn was the greatest coach Michigan State ever had. He got him in the Big Ten. He started in the Big Ten. His record was 54 wins, 9 losses, 2 ties. He would have coached much longer than that, but his health turned bad. He could handle being athletic director. He had an ego. He was great to me. But he and Duffy didn't always see eye to eye because Duffy's personality was saleable to the extent that he was on the cover of Time magazine.
Right.
I always say it's going to be tough for coaches at the college level to get on the cover of Time magazine moving forward, but Duffy was. And there's no question in my mind that diversity at Michigan State was enormous in those days. He got more. Duffy was popular with all the major coaches across America. Darrell Royal, Bear Bryant. They all loved the guy. They didn't play him, so he was close with all those guys. So they had a great player from their state they couldn't get in. They just sent him up here. Duffy and he got along great. Father Hesburgh wanted Duffy ahead of Ara Parseghian, and Hannah wouldn't let him go. And Duffy was loyal to Michigan State. That one, I lived with his son. I went to high school, ran cross country with his son. We lived 2 years together in college, my sister and Duffy's daughter, who's still around, Dree, were close friends. You go to the same school. But in those days, even popular coaches didn't have nearly the celebrity that people like Izzo have today. Even Duffy didn't, because there wasn't the media exposure then, nor the pressure. You only played 9 games, and you could only go to the Rose Bowl. You couldn't go to any other bowl.
There wasn't as much money involved.
There was not even close to that. It just was. Duffy had a very. In those days, the Big Ten Skywriters were the preseason media thing. The season didn't start till September. And I remember on Labor Day when the Skywriters would come in, they'd go to all of the different campuses. They'd interview Duffy, and then Duffy'd have them all over for a keg of beer that night and tell them jokes till 1 or 2 in the morning. But today you don't anything like that.
And for good reason.
For good reason.
Because somebody would write about it.
There's no question about it.
We've had our share of good coaches and coaches that, what we'll say, were not as successful. Is there anything that you can draw some kind of analogy between the successful coaches?
Well, I think timing is everything, and I think who are you working for? If you worked for Luana Simon as the president of Michigan State, she understood college athletics. Okay, separate from anything else as the president, she understood college athletics, and she understood the difficulty and the pressure the coaches had. So when Mark D'Antonio was here, he worked with her, all right? Other presidents, Peter McPherson, did not have a relationship with George Perlis that was going to benefit the two of them, okay? Partly the issue, I thought, was between both of them equally. I used to tell George this all the time. So you got to get along with the guy.
George was pretty approachable. He was probably someplace between George Perlis and Nick Saban. You could run into George. He would be out and about, and then at some point it sort of, you stopped seeing the football coaches as much.
Well, if George would have worked for Luana, who was president at the time, I think his career would have been longer. I think his perspective would have been a little bit different than what it was. They all have different personalities. I loved Darrell Rogers when he was here.
Right.
Denny Stoltz was a great guy, compromised choice. He didn't have any chance to succeed, nor did Bobby Williams. Neither one of those two, in my opinion, ever had a chance to succeed. And I suggested that to both of them. Bobby, it was easier because I was older. And, the one that wowed me was Saban. Did I think he would win 7 national titles when he left here? Of course not. But I thought, I have never met anybody in my life in business or in their profession who is as organized as he was and is. I did his coach's show all 5 years, every one of them.
Right.
I was a host all 5 years. Now, I have great stories about Nick that I tell him, but I tell at speeches and that, which are great for a laugh. But in terms of respect, I knew he was going to be successful. I didn't know how successful. A
lot of people felt that way. People that knew him. I obviously knew who he was. I met with him. I talked to him. He was Joel's partner in the Invitational a couple of years.
Tremendously driven.
Yeah,
I tell
really
people,
focused.
If you're going to get into business and you don't have a much of a background, buy Nick's book that he wrote when he was at LSU, about how to be successful in life, which really didn't have as much to do about football because anyone could learn something from that. Nick was the most misunderstood guy I absolutely ever met in sports was Nick, because people only would see him when he had that gruff demeanor. But I never had a problem with him ever, and now I knew the rules. Don't get me wrong, I knew the rules. But Nick's problem was, if you work for a president here who has a different mindset, and a different ego, and everything else, then if you don't mesh, any college coach has got to have a president that's supportive. I claim more so than the athletic director, because the president can override the athletic director, and athletic directors may not last that long. And the best I was too young. I mean, John Hanna's son Dave was in school with me, and I was somewhat awestruck when I first went on the air. But John Hanna, when I did talk, couldn't have been nice. I mean, the guy was. I mean, he was on the Mount Rushmore of big. I mean, he was a big time guy. I often wonder today how all these people would deal with what the college landscape, not only athletically but educationally, has become today.
Well, they wouldn't deal with it.
They wouldn't.
I don't think they would, because this is it's difficult to accept the type of change that we've seen, and they lived in an era where it was hard enough for women to even own a house or vote or what.
We have 3 boys, and like I tell people, I survived putting 2 of them through Notre Dame, Cornell, Oxford, Purdue, Syracuse, and survived that. All right,
wow.
Survived.
That's a financial commitment.
It's a commitment, but yet I look at what they have to spend today, okay, and I say, how are these people ever going to do this? The cost of getting a college, which to me is far more significant in my own thinking than college athletics are. I mean, to me, the mission at Michigan and Michigan State has nothing to do with who won the Rose Bowl or who went to the Final Four. To me, is what are you doing globally that stands out? And they both have things that stand out, in my opinion, that have absolutely nothing to do with athletics, but you don't hear about it as much. Michigan you do because of their medical school. Michigan State, it's a little bit more inside, but Michigan State turns out brilliant people.
We have the cyclotron.
That's right.
We have the art museum.
Well, how about the agronomy?
Right.
How about landscaping? How about the grass sciences and all that? The world looks to Michigan State to put athletic fields around the world in the Olympics.
But let's talk about football. Do you think Michigan State can get to the level that it was with Mark D'Antonio?
Unless the system changes, in my opinion, there's no chance.
And what do you mean? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you do for Michigan State?
I think across the board, you cannot expect, in my opinion, the landscape today, there is no chance that Michigan State, with the schedule that it plays, which now includes Oregon, Washington, Southern Cal, UCLA, Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Michigan, in my opinion, when D'Antonio was here, they could do it because you could take high school players and develop them and keep your staff together, and you don't have to go match $10 million that Michigan's going to pay a high school quarterback.
Well, how does Wisconsin do it?
They haven't. What have they done?
Well, I mean,
they fired a coach a year ago. They paid a fortune to get a coach that everybody said was the guy at Michigan State, and he just had a losing season there. I mean, all I heard for 2 years was Luke Fickell. Right. He should have been ahead of Mel Tucker. Well, he just had a losing season at Wisconsin, okay? So, I mean, I think there's a level of schools that are going to now, but I think the landscape is going to change. How it's going to change, I don't know. You would have a better guess than I would because you know legally how college athletics can go through. But I think every school's problems are different. You got to prioritize how much money do you have to spend athletically, and how are you going to spend it?
Can a league like Michigan, the Big Ten, survive with the haves and the have-nots, where you take the top 5 schools: Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, maybe Oregon, or not Oregon, then maybe USC or UCLA, and I might be missing one school, but those 5 or 6 schools and everybody else is basically 500.
That's why I say, why increase the playoffs beyond 12? Because if you add 4 more, that's 4 more blowout games. The best teams are there, and we already saw lopsided games to begin with. But again, I always put an asterisk with all these comments because I don't think this system is going to continue. I just don't think it is. to your point earlier about, well, it's never been equally fair across the board for everyone, that's true. It never had. In other words, somebody in recruiting, I remember Saban told me one time, he says, it's hard he said, Tommy Izzo, he gets 2 guys out of Flint and they can win a national title. I got to have 24 guys a year. He said, occasionally I can get Duckett and I can get Charles Rogers. I can get those guys. I can get 2 of the best players in the country to come here. But can I do it every year? Okay. He says, the other day I went to Pennsylvania and I walked in. This kid was, he was kind of open-minded and we really wanted him. I walk in, blah, blah, blah. I do my thing. And I think I did a pretty good job. And as I'm walking out the door down the street, Joe Paterno walked in. And the kid went to Penn State. Because in those days, Joe Paterno was a name and Nick Saban wasn't a name at Michigan State. I mean, I think all of that plays into it. To your point long-term about Michigan State, people say, do you think this guy's a good coach? And I say, what does that include? Because to me, a good coach has got to acquire the talent that he can win with. If you can't do that, in my opinion, you can know all the X's and O's, you can be great with the alumni, you can be great with everything. But if you don't have the same talent, the team you're going to play, you can be a great coach, but you're going to lose.
Well, Mark D'Antonio never had the
But he didn't
talent.
have to go against name, image, and likeness, and he didn't have the portal the way it is today.
And how much of a disadvantage do you think Michigan State is on name, image, and likeness?
I think it's enormous.
It's an enormous part, but obviously we're behind Ohio State. We're probably behind USC. We're probably behind UCLA. Are we behind Indiana?
I don't know that. Indiana's in debt. I mean, to me, where this answer, I was on a radio the other day, one of the guys, he says, well, Michigan State's got great donors. They got billionaire, but he goes on and on. He said, they're not going to let Michigan get it. I said, wait a minute. How do you know what those people want to spend? How do you know where they want to give their money? Maybe they want to give it to the American Cancer Society. Maybe they want to give it to Michigan State to put a new dormitory in. Maybe they want their name on a new building or whatever. That has nothing to do with paying the running back. How do you know that until that happens? Because I've probably been around 4 reasonably supportive Michigan State donors who frown at the idea. It's one thing to donate one time and you get your name on a building and that is there and the building is there for 50 years. But if you give something to a player this year, you got to do it next year. You're going to do it the year after that. And that doesn't guarantee you're going to win. I mean, I think even Ohio State's, they're the same way. I hear their people, and I've met a few of them in Columbus, and they said, yeah, we don't beat Michigan. What, you think we're going to give them $38 million to fire that coach, then go find $25 million more and find another coach? Why is the next guy going to beat Michigan?
They fire their coach when he can't beat Michigan.
Okay, but a lot of this
regardless of how good their record is, that's the way Ohio State
But
feels.
they're going to be like, how are they going to continue to finance? Look, they spent everybody says 20. All right, they won the national title. Okay, now they're losing about 20 to 25 guys. If they want to keep their best player, the starting is at $4.5 million, or he's in the portal. Mm-hmm. I mean, what I'm saying is I don't see how this can. In other words, how does Western Michigan do it? State plays Western Michigan next fall. Okay, Western plays Ohio State next fall. Now, how are those guys going to stay in? How is that going to be reasonably competitive? They have a problem at those 3 schools with enrollment in the university. They're closing dormitories. They're going to worry about the football program. I mean, how are they going to do it?
Well, that's tough. It's tough for those small schools. Mark Montgomery went to U of D, and I think it's going to be tough.
It is.
Detroit Mercy and those schools and Oakland and, but they may be in a division where they can be competitive even if they're not competitive on the NIL with somebody like Michigan State, whereas now I don't know how many schools are in the Big Ten, but is it 20-something?
Well, there's 18. I remember when the California legislature decided that this is a bad deal for athletes. These guys ought to be able to make some money.
Right.
Okay. But the original concept was it's illegal if the Michigan State quarterback goes to the student bookstore and his jersey with his name on the back's getting sold to somebody and he doesn't get any of that. So the original concept was if he wants to go over and sign autographs and they want to pay him for that, what's wrong with that? That was the original thought. Okay, so then that started to spread state to state, because you'll remember California was chastised by everybody else in the NCAA among schools. Wait a minute, that's a recruiting advantage. We don't have that.
Right.
We can't let our guys go over there and get a free cheeseburger or whatever. That was the original. So if a donor wanted to give a kid a dinner, all that would be legal, because up to that point it was illegal. I can remember at the Country Club of Lansing issues where athletes would be out there and it was an issue. Are you paying for that kid's dinner? How's that getting? I remember that. That's another story. But nonetheless, and I thought, when the government gets involved with this stuff, I know what they think, but how are they going to police this? How is this going to work? Because the concept was kids, if they can go out and make money like any other student who gets a job at Kroger's and gets paid for that and goes to school, that works, right? But it didn't turn out that way. And then it got to where the universities were getting involved so that we can help get that money up there to where it is. To me, the original concept, if it would have been that, I think it would have worked great, because then you could have had any of the MSU basketball players, if they want to go do a commercial for a car dealer in town that the car dealer set up, well, what's wrong with that? Okay, that's their name, image, and likeness.
Right.
Now it's how can the schools come up with millions of dollars to outbid Ohio State? How's that sustainable?
Well, I mean, it'll reach its
There are not a
net.
lot of guys like you that are going to pay the money for these guys to come to Michigan State because you're a loyal Spartan.
Thank God our basketball team doesn't require
You know what?
the money.
I'm discouraged by it, because when I grew up, the greatest thing in the world was a football Saturday over here in the fall with a big-time team coming in. And I knew all the players, knew all the coaches and all that. Now look what it's become. And to me, where it all changed was
I don't think
cable TV changed everything.
I don't think it's NIL. I mean, I don't think it's NIL. I don't think. Look at the environment at Michigan State Spartan Stadium is as good as it's ever been. It's the length of the games.
That's a problem.
To go to a game and sit there and watch, 30 seconds and a 3-minute break and you're there forever. You're there forever, and they don't take into consideration it's all about TV and revenue, which is great, but they should just play the game and figure out a way for people at home. They might have to miss a play or two.
But I remember in the days, you should too, used to be, you'd be on TV 1 or 2 times a year.
Right.
If you wanted to see the game, you either went to it or go on the road, listen on the radio, or you watch the Sunday night Duffy Doherty show because he's showing the highlights.
Right.
Now, what game is it on? You go home tonight, take the paper and look at the sports grid. Look at how many college basketball games are on TV every single night.
Right.
And some of these schools I've never even heard. And I say that like my son says, who advertises these? When you buy the Stonehill versus Campbell men's college basketball game, who do you think's watching that's going to buy your service or product as an advertiser? And yet in football, every single game is on television.
Well, the national thing that we all do, I always say this, the one thing we all do on TV is watch the Super Bowl, right? Yep. And so what's the closest thing we have to a Super Bowl in Lansing?
Well, it'd be Michigan State football.
Right. And then second might be basketball. And then maybe the presidential election. Maybe in a at the right time and the right year, but beyond that, there's nothing that we all do.
No,
as
I
a
mean,
group.
the other night I watched the Major League Baseball Network, and they're showing the 1975 World Series between the Reds and the Red Sox, Sparky and the Big Red Machine in Boston with Yastrzemski and blah. And they were saying, and Game 7 here drew 75 million viewers. Today, the World Series Game 7 is lucky to draw 8 million viewers, and the population of the country is almost tripled. Okay, I mean, when you have a saturation, but there was no cable in those days either. There was no cable, and the NFL had not become then.
But more women are watching sports. I mean, you have a lot more people that are glued in.
They are,
to
but it's
sport,
diluted, I think.
But it's definitely diluted,
To
right?
me, the one that has impressed me the most by a mile, because no matter what they do, it works, is the National Football League. I just talked to our sales guy yesterday, who's very sharp, and he said we lost a fortune because we couldn't carry the NFC championship game between the Eagles and the Lions because the Lions got beat. He says, so next year, NBC's got the Super Bowl in San Francisco. I already have 15 sponsors lined up who are paying to buy Sunday Night Football next fall with us.
Because the Lions
They're going to take a hunch that the Lions will be on Sunday night a couple times, like they were 4 times this last fall. So he says, we give them a discount to buy now. He said, but they all want to buy the Super Bowl. I can't sell them that. I only get 16 30-second commercials. If the Lions are in it, it'll triple the price. But I can't. But they want it now at a discount and are going to take a risk because if the Lions aren't in it, people still watch the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's for certain. That's for certain. Well, what do you think about what Dan Campbell has done?
Well, first of all, timing's everything. They couldn't sink any lower. Okay, his timing. And sooner or later, you're going to keep getting high draft picks, and your schedule, which they do they weigh that thing. Wait till you see the Lions' schedule next year. You go 15-2, you pay for it the next year because now the schedule ramps up.
Right.
But to your point, his credibility is he was a good player himself. So when he comes in with all that, he lived it. I mean, he was in all those games. He told his players, "I've been here. I've been in this thing. So this is what we got coming up." I think I think that Sheila Ford understood that I got to stay out of this, but hire good people. So I think the general manager's huge. I mean, he's the one that makes all the deals, and these two get along well, and they obviously have guessed well and have evaluated talent well. To me, the break they got was the quarterback that they traded for, who was an add-on to the deal, played in the Super Bowl himself. And in my opinion, because of him, he has set the table for everything else.
Amazing the way he's
played.
Claim,
you look today in the NFL, there's 32 quarterbacks. How many of those 32 go through 18 weeks and don't miss a play because they're injured? Goff hasn't missed up until he got hurt near the end of the Washington first half. He had missed a play in 3.5 years. If he would have missed a play or missed a game or missed a series or missed a half, they would have lost. They have nothing behind him. The guy that they put in behind him in the Washington game was coaching high school football earlier in the fall. That's the best they could do. All right. So my opinion is that look, Campbell fits the city and he fits the culture. He started 0-10 when he was here with the Lions. He started 0-10. But you got the feeling that, you got to ride it out with some of these guys because they've always been very poor. But I think once a little momentum gets going, and the timing's right because the town hasn't had it, the state hasn't had it. You talk about Michigan State football. I can tell you the last 2 years, 90% of what people approach me about is the Lions.
Yeah, it's been amazing, been a sea change. I mean, timing is only part of it, and you're right about the draft choices, but the Lions have gotten a lot of first-round draft choices that have not panned out for them.
They've guessed wrong.
Yeah. And their talent evaluation is different. Because
but even in this year, all I heard all year was all these guys got hurt. All these guys got hurt. See, when I tell people, how many games did they lose with all those guys out? They lost 1 game.
Right.
Buffalo. And they scored 42 points doing it, okay? But how many games would they have lost if Goff hadn't played? But you take all those defense. Now, at the end of the year, when the playoffs are there and everybody's good, then it's going to show up. Now you need your guys, and Washington scored 45 points on them in Detroit, okay? And then you saw what happened once they got to Philadelphia, it completely changed.
We got about 5 minutes left, and I know you're a big hockey fan. You go to the hockey games, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were here, obviously, under Ron Mason. Probably knew him well.
He was one of my all-time favorite people at Michigan State for a number of reasons.
Right. And Comley followed, and Anastas, and that crew, and then was it Danton Cole?
Yeah, it was Anastas after Comley. Comley's a very close personal friend, great guy. 2 national titles, 2 different schools, and then Tom, and then Danton, and now Adam.
And Danton is sort of my generation, and went to Waverly and won the national championship in '86 under Ron Mason.
Right.
So, good baseball player. Played baseball with
wonderful
Schmaltz.
guy.
Yeah, great guy.
Great guy. Probably is a pretty good hockey coach too. But again, the timing. Adam got into this at the right time, because there's only one way they can go. And there's been success here in hockey and they just redid the arena for him and all that. Do I think he's hiring a good coach? Sure. Look at his team. I mean, they evaluate talent exceptionally well when you look at the talent that he has there. But when I didn't know Adam as well. He played for Comley. Comley told me when they hired him, he said he'll turn this around. He didn't know if he'd turn it around the way he has. But when I watch how Adam does what he does, he's incredibly organized. And he's meticulous. He doesn't take himself too seriously either. Nick did, but Adam doesn't. There's two ways. There are a number of ways to do this.
He's got a good assistant coaches, I think.
Very good assistants. He's got a supportive athletic. I mean, he's in here and Tom Izzo supports him. But Adam's smart because he handles all this well. You know, he knows what buttons to push and that. You know, he went with Tom to Spain with the basketball team. I mean, he's connected. He's close with the president here. I hope Michigan State can keep him. But not only because he's a good coach, he represents the university well. Mm-hmm. Duffy always did. A number of people the Tom Izzo represents the university well because they're always in the public eye, and the public makes it, to me, right, fair, unfair, an opinion of who you work for by who you are.
Yeah, he's not really outspoken at all. He's not necessarily looking for the limelight, but he's really a hockey guy through and through, right?
He's a family guy, and he comes from the upper. I mean, he's a small town type of guy in that, but he's good for him, good for Michigan State. They found him.
Right.
So,
and turned it around, which isn't easy in this day and age.
Well, and the thing is, though, just like Ron had a remarkable record as hockey coach here. I think some of Ron's teams, frankly, were even better some of these because he had NHL players everywhere.
He probably had.
But in a single game knockout in the NHL tournament, hockey's fluky, as you know.
Right.
I mean, Ron won it in '86, but I think there are three other teams he had that were as good or not better. But on one night they got knocked out. And so that ended the season. Whether that happens here or not remains to be seen. But they're 3-4 years ago, I used to sit there at those hockey games with my wife. I said, there can't be 1,200 people in here. I never remember that. Now, see how easy it is to go get a ticket now.
Yeah, it's impossible.
And Detroit sold out this weekend, and that to me is not Michigan. That's Michigan State selling it out.
And the rivalry is back, really.
Yeah.
What do you think? Thanks for coming on. Did a great job.
The Abood law since 1956, big in the community. I told my wife I was coming over this. She thought I committed a crime. So,
if that were true, I think she would know that you probably the cops would catch you red-handed, and they'd be the judge, jury, and executioner.
Well, I've enjoyed our friendship through the years. You've done a great job, and you're philanthropic in a variety of ways, so I'm very pleased that you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Good to see you. Good to see you.